All right, guys, welcome to day 3 of our electricity drawing webinar. We're going to go over several things today and kind of wrap up most of the circuits that I can think of. We've done a pretty good job with lighting circuits, I believe. We're going to move into receptacles today, and we will cover 220 circuits as well as some combinations. So we'll add some lighting circuits to some receptacle circuits as well. So today we'll be starting simple and kind of building towards some more difficult concepts. But some things I want to go over before we start is the difference in receptacles. You have a 15 amp receptacle. You probably can't read that on the back, but it says it somewhere on here that this receptacle is rated for 15 amps. You have a 20 amp receptacle, which will be shown on the back here somewhere that it's a 20 amp receptacle. Another way you can tell a 20 amp duplex receptacle is by this T shape that is given to the receptacle. And that's very important because in this event, in your toolbox, you should have a 15 and a 20 as well as a broken tab, which we will go over today. I will break the tab on this receptacle and show you how that can be added to a neat little lighting receptacle circuit that's seen in bathrooms and shows up on our contest quite a bit. We'll go over Gfcis, ground fault circuit interrupters, and how they work. This is also a fairly common device that we see in our contest, another one you should have in your toolbox. We will go over 220 receptacles and a 220 light switch that can be used to electrify this receptacle. So we're going to do several drawings here, and they're going to build on one another, just like all the other ones have. Let's get started. Back to our board and schematic. We're just going to do a 20 amp receptacle. Real basic problem. Receptacles can't go in light boxes, so you don't even need to consider those. I'm trying to find my ruler here. You need not to even consider those. We will run our source cable to the box. Since it is a 20 amp receptacle, we'll be using 12 gauge wires. We'll be using 12 gauge, 12-2 with ground. Most often in Electricity CDE, you'll see this yellow covering on 12 gauge wire, but 12 gauge wire can come in different colors. I've seen gray, and the gray covering indicated that the 12 gauge wire could be buried underground. I've seen it several different ways. So just because it's yellow doesn't necessarily always mean that it's 12 gauge wire. All right, so since it's a 20 amp circuit, will be coming out of the 20 amp breaker. That's a new thing we haven't done before. This is our 20 amp breaker. So our hot wire should come out of here. Up to this point, all of our circuits have come out of here. And our home run will go where it's always gone. I guess we could draw a ground on this one. Grounding is fairly important in receptacles. So just for review, we'll draw the ground this time. In the contest, you have to draw the ground every time. In the classroom, we get away from doing that whenever I was a teacher anyway. We've had that discussion previously. Let's draw a receptacle. It'll look like a snowman. A skinny side and a longer side. I didn't draw that second one very good. That's kind of equal. On that skinny side, that should be our hot side. I'm going to connect those. I'm going to draw a line that connects these two together. So if I draw my hot wire and I connect to the receptacle here, because of this tab, both sides will be hot. Over here on my neutral side, I'm going to do the same thing. All right, that's basic drawing of a receptacle. And here's how simple this is, guys. You put the hot wire to the brass colored screw. You take the neutral wire, hook it to the return side, and you can ground to the box or you can ground to the device. I think our rules specify that you ground to both. I'll do that. We'll ground to both. Double grounded. So schematically, we went through a 20 amp breaker. We went into a receptacle, and we went to ground. All right, let's build upon that. Let's build upon 120 amp receptacle, and let's do 2 of them. 2 20 amp receptacles. I'm going to electrify either the top or the bottom half of the receptacle. It does not matter which one. There is a concept here we must cover that's called NEC, National Electric Code Neutral. NEC neutral, I don't know if I spelled neutral right or not. I don't have a spell check on this pen. NEC neutral. Very simply, we cannot use both screws on the neutral side. So we have to use a jumper wire. And I'll tell you what, let's draw the electricity, the hot wires first, and then we'll do the home run. So I'm coming in hot here on the top side. Now I could have easily come to the bottom side, doesn't matter. I've got 12-2, which means I have a hot wire here going to the other side. Because we have a tab here, both sides are hot, but whatever's connected to this screw is also hot. So now I can carry electricity off of this receptacle to anything. I could carry it to a switch. I could carry it to another receptacle. I could carry it to a GFI. I could carry it directly to a pull chain light. In this case, I'm carrying it to a receptacle. Let's draw a home run, and I'll explain NEC neutral to the best of my ability. You will see houses wired in the past. You can pull receptacles out of the wall if you're changing out receptacles from prior to the early 2000s, maybe late 90s. We used to wire using this side of the receptacle the same way we use this side. However, we can't do that anymore because of NEC neutral. And I'm not an electrician, and I'm not a expert by any means, but there is a safety hazard to doing so. Enough of a safety hazard that they rewrote the National Electric Code to include NEC neutral, which basically means I have to use this and this together, and then use a pigtail jumper wire to connect to the neutral side. This satisfies the NEC neutral rule to neutral rule in the code, as far as I understood it back when I was teaching. And as far as I know, this is the way we still have to wire to receptacles. I hope I didn't just take something simple and make it complicated, but that's the way you have to do that one. Now, if we wanted to add another receptacle here, we could do that. Receptacles can do this all the way down the line. It's very, very simple process. What we often see is receptacle circuits added to our lighting circuit. So you come out of this receptacle and feed a switch and feed a light. We're going to do some of those, what I call combination circuits today. Just want to go over the basics of wiring receptacles and NEC neutral. So The next progressive step is the GFCI, or ground fault circuit interrupter. And let's go over what's going on with the ground fault circuit interrupter. Up to this point, we have wired receptacles and screws, and I haven't really demonstrated how to do that. I guess this would be an opportune time to show how to make a terminal loop and also connect it to the screw. So let's do that. All right, I'm going to take this piece of Romex here, pretend it was being connected to this receptacle, strip 3/4 of an inch off, and bend it around, make a terminal loop out of it. All right, not the best one I've ever made, but not terrible. On all of the connections we should have been making up to this point, assuming that we take our drawings and go into the shop to our board and start wiring, we have been connecting these terminal loops underneath a hot screw or a neutral screw, and we'll take a screwdriver and tighten that up. And one of the key points that everyone needs to follow here, especially in the CDE, is this loop needs to go in the same direction as we tighten the screw. It's the old righty-tighty, lefty-loosey concept here. So if I'm tightening this screw by turning my screwdriver to the right, then my loop should also be set to the right. And what that basically does, whenever I cinch that screw down, it's going to close this loop down just a little bit, because the screw will actually, the friction of the screw will grab that loop and close it down and make it cinch and make it even that much better of a connection. If we have it going this way against the screw, this is incorrect. You should lose points for this in the CDE. I know you lost points for it in my class if you wired it this way. There's also these receptacles. Some of them you can actually strip the wire. Somewhere up in here they'll have a little blade built in. I don't see it on this one, but I may be missing it. And there's a cool way to wire the receptacle. I guess if you're building commercial electricity or putting in hundreds of these, this would be very beneficial. You can actually set this one had it. Yeah, they've got these little plastic risers here where you can actually set your wire there and it'll hold the wire. I don't know if you guys can see that. You can set your wire in here and this little plastic piece will hold the wire, and you kind of put it in there like that and just wrap it around, and then you can tighten your screw down. So you can almost cinch it down and wrap it around the bottom of the screw. The point here is the better you do this, the safer the connection. The less likely you are to cause grounding out or shorting or sparking or something like that. Also, if you'll notice, by stripping off the right amount of insulation, 3/4 of an inch, and wrapping it around, I don't have an excessive amount of copper sticking out past the plastic right here behind the receptacle, and I have zero black insulation that's going to end up underneath this screw. And if you think about it, that could be kind of that plastic getting sandwiched in between these two pieces, this brass screw and this copper, could cause a poor connection, and we don't want that. We want all metal connections right here. Lastly, it's very good that I don't have a bunch of copper showing, past the plastic on the wire right here, because this is a hot wire. This is going to be electrified, and if I had copper showing back here, that could be dangerous. That could touch the metal box that we had this device mounted in and could cause some problems. So where we started at with terminal loops, the reason we started out with those rules of making them perfect is because we want to teach our students how to make good connections, safe connections, and connections that could never be worried about, I guess is a good way. Connections with our wires that give people peace of mind and good quality. If we don't teach every kid how to wire every circuit, we should at least teach every kid how to make good quality wiring connections. So that is how these should have been connected, how our switches should have been connected, how our lights should have been connected. And that changes now with the GFI or the Gfci. There are screws on the side, but those screws are not built the same as the screws on the side of these receptacles. Attached to this screw inside this box is a plate, And as that plate is threaded to this screw, and as I tighten that screw down, that plate actually goes toward the screw. So if I was to tighten this one down with my screwdriver, that plate inside is going to ease this away until it cinches down on whatever is stuck in these two holes right here. So on the back of a GFI, we're going to backload it. We're not going to wrap the wire around these screws. So up here I have the word line. That's kind of like the input side of our four-way that we discussed yesterday. So our line, I always taught my students that the words IN spelled in, this is your input. So if you're coming from the breaker, you should come into this side of the GFCI. And you should backload. You still have a chrome screw and a brass colored screw on your GFCI. So you still got to follow your rules. You know, this will be your hot wire side. This will be your white wire or neutral wire side. But this, because it says line, this should come from the breaker. Only difference is we're going to stick the wire in the back. I guess I can demonstrate that. I've got enough wire right here. I'll do it with the white wire. You don't have to take off as much insulation. You don't have to take off 3/4 of an inch. You can see my thumb right here. Not quite 3/4 of an inch as we talked about a couple days ago. And what I would do is find these holes back here. Whoever had this before me tightened it down all the way. So I don't have a screwdriver to loosen it. I can do it by hand. Loosen this up. I'm going to backload it here. And you'll see I don't have a lot of copper sticking out. If I'd have stripped it 3/4 of an inch and had a lot of copper sticking out like that, you'd lose a lot of points in the CDE if you were to do something like that. So probably take a little bit off, make it perfect. Make a more perfect fit like that. Now I got all copper touching all this brass. I don't have any insulation showing behind the plastic here. But the point is you're going to backload the GFCI. And let's talk about the other half of the GFCI. So we talked about the word line. I hope you can see that on the video. I'm not real sure. Then down here you'll see the word load or charge. So the GFCI, if I hook other devices to it, just like I did my receptacle earlier, we had those two receptacles that were both hot. I can come out of this load side and I can hook to another receptacle. And if I come out of the load side, whenever this GFCI trips due to an electrical fault or a circuit interruption, whatever's connected to the load side also gets turned off. So the GFCI is a safety device. It is now required on all outside walls of a residence. It is required on all countertops in kitchens and bathrooms. And so everyone should be familiar with these at this point. They are meant to save lives. That's the truth of it. The old adage is the hair dryer in the bathroom falls into the bathtub and there's an electrical shock that can kill someone. Outside circuits, I mean, you could cut an electrical extension cord that you're using, let's say a jigsaw or a skill saw on a project outside. If you don't have it circuit interrupted or you don't have it protected, then, you know, say you do nick that wire. Now you have basically an electrical wire that can hurt somebody or even kill somebody, especially if the ground's wet outside. So what this does is it detects spikes in voltage. So let's look at that real quick. What the GFCI does is it shuts off the ground fault circuit interrupter, shuts off in 1/1000th of a second when it detects a spike in electricity, right? So say our electrical wire or electricity is flowing through like so. Whenever it detects this, it shuts off, and that's what saves lives. Your breaker, quite honestly, can kill you. It only takes an amp, half of an amp, to potentially be deadly. And you're dealing with 15 amps and 20 amp circuits. I mean, that's an extreme amount of amps. And your breaker doesn't throw until you reach over 20 amps. So and the breaker does not detect spikes in electricity. The breaker is built off of, it basically functions off of the heat of the wire that allows the thing to throw in there. So it's not as safe to an individual user as it is an individual user plugging into the ground fault circuit interrupter. The breaker does throw before your wires melt in your house and catch your house on fire. They're very much a safety device, but as far as human lives, not so much. So this was designed by a man. I don't know the full history. I don't remember his name, but the story I was told is he brought it to a trade show, an electrical device trade show, and actually plugged a hairdryer into it. The wives' tale that I heard is he put his daughter in a bathtub full of water and threw the hairdryer into the water, and the little mini breaker inside the GFI went off, and the girl was fine. She was unharmed. She didn't even feel a shock. That's the origination as far as the story that I heard. It could be a rumor, it could be untrue. That's how he promoted the GFCIs when he first invented them. And now they're required on a lot of homes, but they're expensive. So instead of having one on, if you got a house and you want to have 2 receptacles on each outside wall, it's a very basic house drawing. You're talking about 8 GFCI. Some of these things run $50, so that's $400 just in receptacles. But if you could put one GFCI here and come out of the low side to another regular receptacle, or a regular receptacle, an exterior one could cost $5 to $10, could cost $2 to $3. I don't know. I haven't priced them. But you can save a lot of money by loading this regular receptacle off of the GFCI. Same thing in your bathroom, same thing in your kitchen. You could have one GFCI protecting an entire bathroom with, say you had a large bathroom that had 4 or 5 plugs on the countertop. You could use one GFCI to protect all of them, as long as you know how to use the load side. So let's look at a circuit concerning a GFCI, and we'll start off very simple, and then we'll build up. It's not very complex at all, really, and there is some differences in opinion on how to draw these on the contest. I've never been knocked any points for drawing it. We're gonna show all these holes. We're gonna label line and load. And we're going to draw it actually, instead of like a snowman, we're going to draw it like it looks. We're going to draw it like a rectangle. So let's do a 120 amp GFCI, and let's make it to where it's protecting a duplex receptacle. So it's protecting a 20 amp receptacle. All right. We'll go here with the GFCI, and we'll go over 1 box to the regular receptacle. I'm going to show 2 here and 2 here. And I'm going to label the top line. I'm going to show, oh, I did it wrong. Yep, I'm going to go here like this. All right, I'm going to show 2 over here that are hot. I'll show 2 over here that are neutral. We'll call this the load side. So these are neutral, and this side is hot. The top half, I'll just kind of split it in half here for demonstration purposes. Top half is the line side, top half is the load side. So I'm going to come into the line side with my hot and my home run. And notice I'm not using the NEC neutral here on the GFI. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong, but the way I taught it and the way I understood the rules is you didn't have to do NEC neutral on the GFCI since it's already a safety device and protected. Come on, 20 amp here. Now, here's where I can make a mistake. I've got a hot wire and I've got a neutral wire right here. Of course, on this end, there's really no mistake that can be made. I just need to feed the receptacle. But right here I have two choices. I've got an open set of lugs for the line side that I could use on the GFI. I've got two open sets on the load side. The problem asks that the GFI is protecting a duplex receptacle. So that language tells me that I have to come out of the load side. So whenever this thing throws, whenever that reset button throws, it detects a spike either on the what's ever plugged into the Gfci or whatever's plugged into the duplex receptacle protecting it. Whenever it throws, this side's still going to be hot. This doesn't control the breaker. Rather, the breaker controls the Gfci. So this top half of this Gfci, even though this is protected and this is protected, the two interfaces that you plug into are protected. Internally, these two wires, this wire is still hot and this wire is still a home run. So whatever's connected to this is also going to remain hot even if the Gfci throws. So there is a case where I could have another receptacle that is not protected by the Gfci, and at the same time having one that is. For our purposes on this problem, we need to connect to either one of these hot open lugs right here on the load side, and also hook to an open neutral on the load side. Now this is basically a GFI because it's protected by a GFI. This GFI is now protecting this. If I wanted to put another receptacle here that's protected by the GFI, all I've simply got to do is change it to NEC neutral, come out of this hot side over to this receptacle, and now I have two receptacles that are being protected by a Gfci. If you've got a newer model house, pay attention to your countertops where you plug in your appliances and see if you've got Gfcis everywhere or if you have a single Gfci and then several regular receptacles, all of which go down whenever this is thrown. I'm going to break the tab on this receptacle. We're going to start looking at combination circuits, and from this point on, I've basically covered lighting and receptacles. Now that I haven't covered 220s, and we'll save that for last. That's so simple, we'll just save it till the end. But at this point, the Electricity CDE is basically a combination of all the things previously covered in the last two videos. Once again, I haven't covered 220s. We'll do that in a minute. So I'm not, don't quote me as saying, well, everything he's gone over in the last 3 days is what's on the contest. That's not true. The contest is a combination of all the information that I've given you in the last few days, plus a little bit more, plus whatever they dream up of next, and plus whatever I forgot to tell you about. So this is not by any means an all-inclusive set of webinars to cover everything you need to know. But we will start diving into some combinations of topics that we've previously covered. And one that's an oldie but a goodie that shows up in a lot of electricity contests that I know of is the broken tab receptacle. Now, every box should have a broken tab receptacle. Don't go around breaking tabs every day to create one. I'm going to break a receptacle today to show you what one looks like and how to use it, and then we're going to draw it on the board. Every one of these comes with a plate in the back that's manufactured with a connection right here that we call it a tab. This little tab makes sure that whenever I connect to this screw with a hot wire, that this one is hot. The electricity basically passes from this side to this side through this little electrical tab, this little brass tab that connects them. Well, if I break that, I can do some neat things with this receptacle. I'm gonna do that right now. I'll take a pair of pliers. I'm just gonna bend this a couple times and break the tab. All right. Now you can see that these plates are no longer connected. I took the tab and disconnected them. And that's going to allow me to have individual feeds to the top and bottom half of this receptacle. What I understand, under no circumstances should we ever do that to the neutral side. I've never seen a circuit where we broke the tab on the neutral side or were ever asked to. So please don't break the tab on the neutral side, only on the hot side. So let's look at the broken tab circuit. This is pretty advanced, and pretty fun to do in class whenever you finally figure it out. So we're going to do it real simple. We're going to do one light and half of a receptacle controlled by a switch. This is going to be 15 amp. It could be 20, but this is a 15 amp receptacle. So I'm gonna stick with what it is. I'm gonna use a 15 amp breaker to do this circuit. So I want one light and half of a receptacle controlled by a switch. The other half of the receptacle, and I'm going to abbreviate here, is to remain hot. This is a bathroom circuit. This is a circuit that allows you to turn the lights on in the bathroom in the morning and have a radio plugged in to that same side that's controlled by the light, and your radio will come on in the morning. And whenever you leave out and you're done getting ready for the day, you walk out of the bathroom, turn the light off, well, then your radio goes off, and the bottom half of your plug is available for you to use a hair dryer or a curling iron or some other temporary device that you use in the mornings. You can use the entire receptacle as hot. You can hook a receptacle up to a switch with the tab still intact and have your radio here and have your curling iron here. But if you want to warm your curling iron up and go do something else, like go to the kitchen, pour a cup of coffee, you have to turn the light on as well. It's just a quirky little circuit that I have seen in real life, and I have taught for years in the classroom, and that is, for whatever reason, I guess because it's kind of difficult to understand, one that shows up in the Electricity CDE sometimes more than other circuits. So a light and half of a receptacle controlled by a switch. The other half of the receptacle is to remain hot. We'll run the source cable to the switch. We'll make it simple. To the switch box. We'll make it simple to where we don't have to break a whole bunch of color codes. So I'm going to have a switch here, just a regular single pole, single throw switch. I'm going to have a receptacle here. This receptacle is going to look slightly different from the others. I'm going to show my tab on the neutral side. But on the hot side, I'm not. On the hot side, I'm going to show no tab. It's going to look like that. And I'll have a light. And that light comes on whenever the other half of the receptacle that's controlled by the switch comes on. I have seen the judges ask you to specify which side is hot and which side is controlled by the switch. I have seen them say one light and the top half of a receptacle controlled by a switch. That means you have to be paying a little more attention to where your wires are running coming from the switch and which ones are coming from the breaker. So let's do this. Let's draw a Romex. Let's go up here and feed the light. By this time in your electrical career, you've been introduced to 12.3 and 14.3, 12.2 and 14.2, and obviously you're going to need 2 hot wires in this Romex. So I've got to feed one to the light and half of the receptacle. One of these coming from the switch has to make 2 things hot at the same time, which we can pigtail to accomplish that. The other one needs to be coming from the breaker at all times hot. So I'm going to need 2 wires dedicated to carry hot, and of course I need a home run or the white wire left. So this is eventually going to be 14.3. We can go ahead and label it that now that we know. This I only need a hot and a neutral, so I'm going to go 14.2 with ground. This will be 14.2 with ground. And like we've done previously with complicated circuits, I suggest we go ahead and draw our home run and get it out the way. I can't hook to here and then come out of here and go home, so I have to satisfy the NEC neutral rule. We'll go there and pigtail to the neutral. Shortcut on NEC neutral, you can teach your kids that you can only use one of these, you can't use both. You can always use both of the hot side. All right, so let me finish my home run, and that way I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's out of the way. Now all I'm doing is deciding where the feed is. This is a 15 amp circuit, so I'm going to go here. Now, two things have to always be hot in this scenario. Half of the switch, right, is going to receive electricity from the breaker, but we also have a receptacle that always needs to be hot. So I can't just run my source cable straight to this screw. I won't have any way to get electricity to this half of this receptacle. So that tells me that I have to curl this out, connect it to the receptacle. This is always hot. And then use a jumper wire to electrify the switch. So there'll be 3 wires right there doing that. Whatever's hooked to that breaker is hot when the breaker comes on. I want half of that switch to be hot. I want half of this receptacle in this broken tab scenario to be hot as well. So here's where my extra wire comes in. I have a red wire in this 14.3. I'm going to use that to grab electricity from the output side of this switch. And likewise, I need 2 things to receive electricity from the switch. I need the top half of the receptacle and the light. So I can't just go to one or the other. I have to go to both. When I've got to go to both, I'm going to curl out. I'm not a big fan of using red jumper wires. I don't know. I know that this is hot. I know that this wire is black coming into my 14.2, so I'm just going to hook it there. And you could very easily use a red jumper wire or a black. Either one would be suitable. What would not be suitable is to use a white jumper wire in this case. We got 3 wires right there. We'll color that red. And so let's follow our electricity. When we turn our breaker on, this becomes hot and this becomes hot. So whatever I plug into the bottom half of this receptacle, as long as the breaker is on, this half of this receptacle is always electrified. It's always hot. It's always ready for use. However, whatever's plugged into this only comes on when the light comes on. If you follow our feed coming out of the switch, our switch is now controlling both the light and the top half of this receptacle. And the only way we can accomplish that is by breaking the tab on this receptacle to have those 2 different feeds. Schematically, this one is a good one. Schematically, we'll go 15 amp. So we have a switch. We have a switch. Now let me draw my receptacle. I'm actually going to draw the receptacle with the neutral side here. I'm going to draw this side without the tab. The only way I really know to do it to explain the circuit. So I've got a split here because this is controlling both the top half of this receptacle and a light. I have a split here, right, because this source cable is feeding the switch and half of the receptacle. And then both of these, the light and the receptacle, tie together. So I need to show a dot right there, and they go to ground. The schematic is almost as confusing as the regular drawn diagram. I've seen this done with 3-way switches where it says a light controlled by 2 locations plus the broken tab receptacle part of the circuit. This is not the only way a broken tab can be used. I wanted to keep it simple today and just use 1 switch, but you could easily use a 3-way here, a 3-way here, and then the broken tab here and the light. This is where the Electricity CDE really challenges students, because we don't have a set list of problems to memorize. You have to be able to combine circuitry. You have to be able to combine receptacles, being broken tab or not, to regular switches, and that's where it can really get fun. I see that I'm running out of time with the high school class that's logged in, so I'm gonna go ahead and cover 220 before their bell rings and they have to leave. So 220 There's a lot of mileage about electricity when it comes to 220. I mean, you talk about alternating current being converted to direct current whenever we're dealing with our 110 circuits, and then with 220, you're dealing with alternating circuits on different wavelengths, right? So my one pole is traveling on this cycle, the positive and the negative, and then the other one is traveling here, and then they go back to neutral on each other. That's a little confusing, and that's a real basic explanation of something that's a lot more complicated. But let's call this, let me just draw a big circle right here. This is my washer dryer receptacle. This is a 220 volt device. There is no dedicated neutral wire in 220 circuits. Up to this point, there has been. We've had a white wire. We called it a home run. It had to go back to the neutral bar every time. It was great. Life was great. Electricity goes in, electricity comes back on that wire. Well, we kind of eliminate that with 220 devices. You're telling me that electricity goes out on the top half of the wire and comes back on the bottom half of this single wire? No, it's not quite that way. It comes back in cycles. It goes and comes back in its own cycle. So on a 220 receptacle, there is no neutral. There is no hot side and neutral side. There's only a hot side and a hot side and a ground screw, right? So the way you got to wire this, according to NEC, is you got to have a dedicated, insulated ground wire. So we can't use the bare copper wire right here. We're actually going to use our white wire. We're going to use our black and red to hook up to these two hots, and we're just going to take our bare copper wire and ground it to the box. 220 volt receptacles have to go in the deep wall box. That's the last one on the page. This is our deep wall grounded 220 receptacle box, so they go there. And it has to be 12 gauge wire because our 220 volt receptacle only offers 20 amp. And it's called 220 not because when you look at a 220 volt receptacle, let me dig around here. Here's a 220 volt breaker. It's not 220 because the switch has the number 20 on it twice. This is a 20 amp version, but it's not 2 times 20. This is a 220 because it grabs two 110 volt feeds that are on separate wavelengths and combines them together into one 220 volt feed. So let's draw it. Let's do a 220 volt receptacle. This is as simple a circuit as is in the whole event. We're going to come down, go all the way over, and come up to this deep wall box. All lines are crooked. Daryl Simmons would be upset with me if he saw how crooked I was drawing these lines, but I'm trying to beat the bell here. So this is going to be 12-3 with ground. Now for 100 years we'd have used 12-2. You have the black wire here, white wire here, and a bare neutral here, the bare copper here, and there's millions of homes in America that have that. But all new builds require a coated ground wire. So we use 12-3 now for our 220 volt circuit. So we're going to come out hot here with the black. Our other hot wire will be the white one. This, the red one. This white wire will hook to the neutral bar, but this is not necessarily a home run. This is a ground wire now. This is being used just like we've been using the bare copper ground. So our 220 volt receptacle kind of looks something like this. The way I've always drawn it, like an alien. And then I have to draw my ground. I'll use the green to draw the ground screw. This represents the bare copper wire, this green, so I'm going to ground it off there. My white wire is going to be my coated ground wire. It goes there. My red wire can go to either one of these hot lugs. My black wire go to the other one. and that is a 220 volt receptacle. The schematic has 2 breakers, but they don't have to label them 20 amp. The receptacle kind of looks like this, I guess, on the schematic. And you draw 1 to each, and that's it. There's no dedicated ground wire, so that's the way you draw that. I could be wrong here, and if somebody wants to correct me, you're more than welcome to after the video gains a little traction. If we want to add a switch to this, you should have a 220 volt switch in your toolbox. It looks like a 4-way switch, but it is not a 4-way switch. It has on-off on it. You can see the words on and off written. If I hold it just right in the light, you'll see that written on the switch. These are for big lighting circuits like in gymnasiums or coliseums, or in a school you might have an auditorium. When you turn it on and it takes those bulbs, those big bulbs, 5 minutes to warm up and actually turn bright. Those are 220 volt lighting circuits, and you can have a 220 volt switch for those lighting circuits. It takes 220 volts of electricity in one side, on the line side, you can see it labeled there, and you can send it out to whatever you're controlling off of the load side. We don't have a 220 volt lighting circuit, so we use the 220 volt receptacle in the CDE. So 220 volt receptacle controlled by a 220 volt switch. And this is called a double pole single throw switch. And here's what's going on inside. Inside this switch, we have 2 poles that are either like that, where they're not touching, or they're like this, where they are. So it basically, it's 2 simple switches connected in together, basically inside. That's what's going on in here, in contrast to the 4-way, which did this, or it was a scissor. This is not a 4-way. This is a double pole, and it acts on a single throw or a single action of the switch. All right, so let's draw this real quickly. It's going to be 12-3 with ground. I have to draw my 220 volt receptacle all the way over here. I've got to draw a green ground screw because of the dedicated coated ground wire. This is going to be 12-3 with ground. Come out of here with a hot wire, come out of here with the other hot wire, and come out of here with the ground wire. We're just going to hook colors together here. So I'm going to hook that together. I'm going to hook this together. These are 2 wires, and it's very tempting to just draw one line here. Very tempting to come out with one black line and just show it going from here to here, but that's not accurate. You have to curl these out and connect them with a wire nut. So you need to draw it that way in your diagram. On the other side of the circuit, I can't get that to slide on there. There we go. Other side of the circuit, we go to either hot. With those, we use the white wire to connect here, and you can use the bare copper wire to connect there. Schematically, it'll look something like this. These go into a big switch that has poles inside of it. They're both either on or off. Can't draw one off and one on, but we'll come in like that. We'll come out here to the receptacle, and I may just draw it like that. Draw it this way. There's a 20 amp. Something along those lines. If you're a young ag teacher, you may want to consult with an older ag teacher at a contest and see, bring your drawings and see if that works and get some opinions on it. But that's my understanding of how the 220 volt schematic works. So from this point on in the class, what I would normally start doing is combining circuits and tell people in my class, all right, I want a switch controlled by 2 lights and a receptacle. And so you would combine those lessons taught, those single circuits, if you will, and start combining them. You could ask for a 220 volt receptacle circuit, and I'll also ask them to add 2 lights controlled by a simple switch. So when you get into the CDE, it's never going to be one of these single circuits that I've taught in the last 2 days. Rather, it's always going to be a combination of all the circuits that I've taught. I hope that this video serves a purpose of teaching kids and teachers a little bit more about our Electricity CDE. I hope it sheds light on what this paper, what can be done with this paper, and also what can be transferred from this paper to the shop and done on those electricity boards that we've had for all these years. It's been a pleasure spending this time with you. If you've made it this far through all 3 of these videos, surely you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out anytime, and if within my power, we'll be sure to try to help. Have a great day.
You have been disconnected from the meeting.